The first thing most people do when they hear the words nuclear war is picture a mushroom cloud, a crater, total annihilation, and everything gone. That mental image does something powerful. It makes them give up before they even start. Because if the whole world is gone, what is the point of preparing? Here is the thing, though. That picture is not accurate, at least not for the vast majority of people who would actually be affected. The reality of a nuclear event, whether it is a single detonation, a regional exchange, or even a broader conflict, is that most of the population would not be in the immediate blast zone. They would be miles or even hundreds of miles away, dealing with what comes after. And what comes after specifically is radioactive fallout. These are particles of dust and debris that have been irradiated by the explosion, pulled up into the atmosphere, and then carried by the wind before settling back to the ground. Fallout is dangerous. There is no sugarcoating that. But unlike the blast and thermal effects, which are instant and devastating at close range, fallout follows predictable rules. It behaves in ways we understand. And most importantly, it is something a regular person can protect themselves from with knowledge, a plan, and about 48 hours of discipline. That is what this whole protocol is about. Not bunkers, not million-dollar underground shelters buried in the mountains of Montana, and not tactical gear, gas masks, or armored vehicles. This is about what a normal person in a normal home in a normal neighborhood can do right now to dramatically increase their chances of surviving the most dangerous window after a nuclear detonation, the first 48 hours. I want to say something up front, too. I know we have touched on some of these ideas before: shelter, supplies, emergency communication, and the basics of nuclear threats. But this is one of those topics where people need to be reminded more than they need to be taught. You can know something intellectually and still not have a plan for it. You can understand the concept and still freeze in the moment because you never sat down and thought through the specifics. So even if some of this sounds familiar, stick around. The way it fits together as one coherent protocol might change how you think about it entirely. Let us start with the single most important concept in this entire protocol, because it shapes every decision that follows. It is called the 7 to 10 rule, and it has been used by civil defense planners for decades. The research behind it goes all the way back to the nuclear weapons effects studies at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The 7 to 10 rule says that for every 7-fold increase in time after a nuclear detonation, the radiation intensity drops by a factor of 10. That sounds abstract, so let me put numbers on it. If we call hour 1 our starting point and the radiation level outside is 1,000 units, then at 7 hours, it has dropped to 100. At 49 hours, roughly 2 days, it is down to 10. At 2 weeks, about 343 hours, it is around 1. That is a 99.9% reduction in 2 weeks. And the most dramatic drop happens in the first 2 days. What this means in practical terms is that the most dangerous period is the first few hours after fallout arrives. If you can shelter effectively for just the first 48 hours, you have waited out the absolute worst of it. After that, you have options. You can reassess. You can relocate if needed. You can make rational decisions based on conditions rather than guessing in a panic. The physics are literally on your side if you can just wait. That is the core of this entire protocol. Get through 48 hours with maximum protection, and you have given yourself a massive life-saving advantage. Now, let us talk about what protection actually looks like when you do not have a purpose-built shelter. Because that is most of us. Most people do not have a bunker. And the good news, the genuinely encouraging good news, is that you do not need one. The concept you need to understand is called a protection factor. Think of it as a multiplier that tells you how much a given structure reduces your radiation exposure compared to standing out in the open. Every building provides some level of shielding against gamma radiation, which is the primary external threat from fallout particles on the ground and on surfaces around you. A standard wood frame house, the kind a lot of people live in, gives you a protection factor of roughly 2 to 3. That means you would receive about half to a third of the radiation you would get standing outside. That is something, but it is not great. If radiation levels outside are dangerous, half of dangerous is still not good. A brick or concrete building on the ground floor pushes that number up significantly. The center of a large concrete office building can offer a protection factor of 50, 200, or more, depending on how deep into the structure you go. Every wall between you and the outside adds shielding. Every floor above you with fallout on it adds distance. Distance and mass. Those are your friends. And a basement, even in a regular residential home, typically gives you a protection factor around 10. That means you would receive about 1/10 the outside dose. FEMA's guidance states that a protection factor of 10 is considered adequate for saving a large number of lives in a widespread fallout scenario. 10. That is a normal basement. So, the first rule of the 48-hour protocol is straightforward. Get inside the most substantial structure you can reach within about 10 to 15 minutes of becoming aware of a nuclear explosion. Official sources say you will have roughly 10 minutes or more after a nuclear explosion before fallout begins arriving. That is your window. Do not try to drive across town. Do not try to outrun it. Get inside. More walls and more mass between you and the outside means more protection. A basement is ideal. The center of a large concrete building works well. An underground parking garage, a subway station, or a commercial building with thick walls are all excellent choices. Any of those are far better than being outdoors in a car or in a wooden structure with lots of windows. If you live in an apartment building, you are actually in a better position than you might think, especially if your building is made of concrete or brick. Move to an interior room away from windows and exterior walls. If you are on an upper floor, try to get lower if you can do so quickly and safely. But do not waste precious minutes trying to evacuate the building entirely. The structure itself is your shelter. Use it. Here is something a lot of people overlook, and it is genuinely empowering once you understand it. You can improve your protection significantly with stuff you already have in your home. The principle is simple. Mass blocks radiation. That is it. The denser the material, the better it shields. So, think about what you own that is heavy and dense. Books. A wall of books provides real shielding. Water containers, big jugs, filled trash cans, whatever you have. Water is actually a decent radiation shield because of its density. Dense furniture like dressers filled with clothes, bags of soil, sand, or even cat litter if you have it. Filing cabinets full of paper. If you pile these things between you and exterior walls, especially the wall closest to where fallout would accumulate, you are adding meaningful layers of protection. Stack books along the interior side of an exterior wall. Fill containers with water and line them up. Pull mattresses off beds and lean them against walls, or use them as overhead shielding if you are in a basement. You are not building a bunker. You are building a barrier using what is already in your home. Even adding a few inches of dense material between you and the outside can noticeably reduce your radiation dose over those critical 48 hours. If you have a basement, the improvements become even more dramatic. Close and cover any windows. Stack heavy items along the walls that are above ground level. If you can safely pile earth or sandbags against the exterior walls, you are approaching the protection levels of a dedicated shelter. Research at Oak Ridge showed that a well-improved basement can achieve a protection factor of several hundred. That is remarkable for something built with household materials and a few hours of work. All right, so you are inside. You have gotten to the best shelter you can. You have stacked whatever mass you could between yourself and the outside. Now what? The next priority is air management. And understanding this point changes how you think about the threat. Fallout is not a gas. It is not an invisible cloud that seeps through walls. It is particulate matter, basically radioactive dust and grit, sometimes as fine as powder, sometimes more like sand. It settles on surfaces, the ground, rooftops, cars, and plants. It can be carried by the wind, and it can get into your lungs if you breathe it in, which is a much bigger problem than external exposure, because now the radiation source is inside your body. So your job is to limit how much contaminated particulate matter gets into your shelter space, especially during the initial hours when the concentration is highest. Turn off any HVAC system, furnace, or air conditioner that pulls air from outside. Close every window and door and seal visible gaps with duct tape, plastic sheeting, damp towels, or whatever you have on hand. Close fireplace dampers and shut bathroom and kitchen exhaust vents. You are not trying to make the space permanently airtight. You are reducing the amount of contaminated particles that infiltrate during the critical window. Once the main fallout cloud has passed, which typically happens within a few hours of the detonation, you can crack things open enough to allow some air circulation. This is especially important in warm weather, or if your shelter space is crowded, because heat buildup in a sealed room with multiple people can become its own problem. But during that initial heavy fallout period, sealed is better. Now, decontamination. If anyone in your group was outside during or shortly after the detonation, or if they had to travel through an area where fallout was settling, they need to decontaminate before entering the main shelter area. This is critical, and it is simpler than people think. Step 1. Remove outer clothing carefully, without shaking it or creating dust. Fold it inward. The CDC states that removing your outer layer of clothing can eliminate up to 90% of radioactive material on your body. 90% just from taking off your jacket and pants. Bag the contaminated clothing and leave it as far from the shelter space as possible, ideally outside a sealed door or in a separate room. Step 2. Wash all exposed skin and hair with soap and water. Do not scrub aggressively because you do not want to break the skin and create an entry point for contaminants. Do not use conditioner on your hair because it binds particles to the hair shaft. Just soap, water, and gentle but thorough washing. If running water is not available, a wet cloth or even wet wipes will help. The goal is to physically remove the radioactive dust from your body before it has prolonged contact with your skin. Step 3. Put on clean clothing that was stored indoors and away from any contamination. That is it. That is the whole decontamination process for a civilian in an emergency. It is not complicated, but it matters enormously. This leads naturally into supplies, and I want to keep this section grounded because the supply list for a 48-hour shelter stay is much shorter than most people imagine. Water. 1 gallon per person per day is the standard recommendation. For a 48-hour shelter period, that is 2 gallons per person. A family of 4 needs 8 gallons total. That fits in a single closet. It fits under a bed. It takes up essentially no space in a garage or pantry. There is no reasonable excuse for not having this on hand at all times, nuclear threat or otherwise. Food. Non-perishable, ready to eat, requiring no preparation or cooking. Canned goods with pull-tab lids, crackers, peanut butter, dried fruit, granola bars, trail mix, and canned tuna. You are not planning meals. You are sustaining calories and morale for 2 days. This does not need to be fancy or expensive. A battery-powered or hand-crank radio. I cannot stress this enough. This might be the single most important item on this list after water. Cell towers may be down, internet infrastructure may be damaged, and your phone might not receive emergency alerts. A simple weather radio or any AM/FM radio with fresh batteries gives you access to emergency broadcasts, which will tell you radiation levels, when it is safe to move, where to go, and what conditions are like in your area. In the first 48 hours after a nuclear event, information is survival. A $10 radio could be the difference between making a good decision and a fatal one. Beyond that, a flashlight with extra batteries, basic first aid supplies, any critical prescription medications your household depends on, ideally with at least a 2-week supply on hand, plastic bags for contaminated clothing, duct tape, and a roll of plastic sheeting for sealing gaps. A few damp towels or wet wipes for decontamination if water pressure fails. That is the core kit. Everything I just listed can fit in a single storage bin. It can live in a closet, under a staircase, or on a pantry shelf. Assembling it costs less than a dinner out for 2. And having it ready before you need it is the entire difference between a plan and a hope. Let me address something that gets a lot of attention and a lot of confusion. Potassium iodide, or Ki tablets. These show up in almost every nuclear preparedness list, and they do have a legitimate use, but that use is much narrower than most people understand. Potassium iodide works by saturating your thyroid gland with stable iodine, so it cannot absorb radioactive iodine-131, which is one of the many isotopes released during a nuclear event. Iodine-131 has an affinity for the thyroid, and absorbing it significantly raises the long-term risk of thyroid cancer, especially in children. But here is what Ki does not do. It does not protect you from radiation. It does not treat radiation sickness. It does not shield you from gamma rays. It does not make you safe to go outside. It protects one organ from one specific isotope. That is it. The CDC recommends KI primarily for people under 40 and for pregnant or breastfeeding women because younger thyroids are more vulnerable. Adults over 40 should only take it when predicted exposure is high enough to potentially destroy thyroid function, and timing matters. KE is most effective when taken shortly before or right after exposure. Taking it days in advance provides no benefit. Taking it more than a few hours after inhalation of radioactive iodine 131 provides significantly less protection. So yes, having KI tablets on hand is reasonable, especially if you have kids. They are inexpensive, they have a long shelf life, and they are available over the counter. But do not let them become a security blanket that distracts you from the fundamentals. Shelter, shielding, water, food, and information will do far more for your survival than any single pill. Now, I want to talk about something that rarely gets the attention it deserves in nuclear preparedness discussions: the mental and psychological dimension. Being confined in a small, possibly dark, sealed space for 48 hours is hard. Full stop. It is hard for adults, and it is especially hard for kids. If you are with family members, there will be tension, fear, restlessness, and moments where someone wants to just open the door and check what it looks like outside. And that impulse, that very human urge to see and assess and do something, is one of the most dangerous things in a fallout scenario. Leaving shelter too early, even for a few minutes, can result in a radiation dose that would have been entirely avoidable. So, build some mental resilience into your plan. The same way you would stock water and food, have a deck of cards, a few books, a journal, or a puzzle, something that occupies attention. Have activities for children if you have them. Coloring books, small toys, anything that creates normalcy. Assign tasks to people so everyone has a role and feels useful. Someone monitors the radio. Someone manages water rationing. And someone keeps track of time. Speaking of which, keep a watch or clock in your kit. Losing track of time in a windowless interior room makes everything feel longer and creates anxiety. Talk to each other. Acknowledge that the situation is scary. Do not pretend everything is fine when it is not, because people can feel that dishonesty and it erodes trust right when you need it most. But also, keep returning to the facts. Every hour you stay sheltered, the radiation outside is dropping. You have water, you have food, and you are doing the right thing. The 7 to 10 rule itself is one of the most powerful psychological tools you have because it gives you a concrete timeline. It turns waiting from passive suffering into an active strategy with measurable progress. At 7 hours, you are at 1/10. At 49, you are at 100th. That knowledge alone can keep someone from making a rash decision. Preparedness is not about having all the answers. It is about having enough answers to stay calm when it counts. Let me walk through the actual timeline of the 48 hours because I think putting it all in sequence makes the protocol feel real and actionable. Hour 0, detonation. You see a bright flash, feel a shockwave, or receive an emergency alert. If you have any advanced warning, even a few minutes from an alert system, you are already moving toward your shelter area. If the flash catches you completely off guard, do not look toward it. Get behind something solid immediately. If you are outdoors, lie face down and cover exposed skin. Once the shockwave passes, you have roughly 10 to 15 minutes to reach adequate shelter before fallout starts arriving. Move quickly. Get inside the best building you can reach. Hours 1 through 6, the most dangerous window. Fallout is settling. Radiation levels outside are at their peak. You are sealed in your shelter in the most interior, most protected position possible. Everyone is accounted for. Anyone who is outside has decontaminated. Radio is on, tuned to an emergency broadcast frequency. You are drinking water, eating as needed, and keeping calm. This is the hardest stretch because it feels the most uncertain. Hours 7 through 12. Based on the 7 to 10 rule, radiation has dropped to about 1/10 of what it was at hour 1. Still potentially dangerous outside, but the rate of decline is encouraging. Stay put. Continue monitoring the radio for official instructions. This is a good time to do a check on your water supply. Make sure everyone has eaten something and keep morale up. Hours 12 through 24. By the end of the first full day, radiation exposure potential has decreased by roughly 80% from that first hour. Conditions are improving steadily. You may begin hearing evacuation instructions or shelter duration guidance on the radio. Do not leave until told it is safe or until you have strong reason to believe conditions outside are manageable. Hours 24 through 48. The second day. Radiation continues its predictable decline. At the 49-hour mark, levels are approximately 1% of what they were at hour 1. If you have maintained good shelter discipline this entire time, your total cumulative exposure has been kept to a manageable level. By the end of this window, emergency officials should be providing specific actionable guidance. Whether that means staying put for a few more days, evacuating along a designated route, or relocating to an unaffected area will depend on your location relative to the detonation. After 48 hours, you are not entirely in the clear. Longer-lived isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 persist in the environment for years, but you have survived the critical period. The acute life-threatening phase is behind you. The decisions from here are about longer-term logistics, sourcing clean water, managing food supplies, potential relocation, and medical monitoring. Those decisions are infinitely easier to make when you are alive, healthy, and thinking clearly because you sheltered effectively when it mattered most. One more thing I want to cover before we wrap up: communication planning. In the chaos of a nuclear event, communication infrastructure will be strained at best and destroyed at worst in affected areas. Cell networks get overwhelmed even in minor emergencies. In something this severe, you cannot count on being able to call or text, so make a plan now. Decide in advance where your family would meet if you are separated when something happens. Pick a primary location and a backup. Have an out-of-area contact that every member of your family knows to call or text. Local calls may be blocked, but long-distance connections sometimes get through because they route through different infrastructure. Write critical phone numbers on a physical piece of paper and keep it in your emergency kit. Your phone might be dead, damaged, or affected by an electromagnetic pulse. Paper does not need batteries. If you have children in school, know what the school's lockdown protocol is for this type of event. Most schools are required to shelter in place and will not release children during an active emergency. Knowing that in advance keeps you from making a dangerous trip to collect them during the highest risk window. The people who handle emergencies well are not the ones with the most equipment. They are the ones who have thought through the scenario ahead of time and know what their first 3 moves are. After those first 3 moves, you can figure the rest out, but those initial steps need to be as close to automatic as possible. So, let me bring all of this together. The 48-hour nuclear survival protocol, no bunker required, comes down to a handful of principles that work together. Get inside immediately. Find the most substantial structure you can reach in 10 to 15 minutes. More mass, more walls, and more distance from the outside. A basement is best. The interior of a concrete building is excellent. Even a regular apartment building is decent. Seal your shelter space. Close everything. Tape gaps. Shut off external air systems. Reduce particle infiltration during the critical early hours. Decontaminate anyone who is outside. Remove outer clothing carefully. Wash exposed skin and hair with soap and water and change into clean clothes. Simple, fast, and eliminates up to 90% of surface contamination. Have your basic supplies ready before you need them. Water, food, radio, flashlight, medications, and sealing materials. 1 bin, 1 closet. That is all it takes. Stay inside for at least 48 hours. Monitor emergency broadcasts. Follow official guidance. Resist the urge to go outside and check conditions yourself. Let the 7 to 10 rule work in your favor. Maintain your mental state. Track time. Stay busy. Communicate with your household. Assign roles. Know that every passing hour is making things safer outside. That is the whole plan. It is not glamorous. It does not require a trust fund or a compound in rural Idaho, but it is grounded in decades of research, and it is designed for people living real lives in real homes with real budgets. The most common thing I hear from people who start preparing is that they wish they had started sooner. Not because something terrible happened, but because the sense of calm that comes from having a plan is something you feel immediately. You sleep a little better. The headlines do not hit as hard. You carry this quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have taken responsibility for your own safety in a way most people never do. You do not need to do everything today. Start with water, then food, then a radio, then a plan for your family. Build from there. Small steps done consistently add up to real security. You do not need a bunker. You need a plan, a few supplies, and 48 hours of patience. And now, you have all the tools to begin. If this protocol changed the way you look at survival and the reality of modern threats, please subscribe and like the video. We are uncovering the strategies that could save your life when the world turns upside down. Prepare for the future. The next essential guide will be released soon.